Well, everybody, Mark Down and Mel, 1969, 1971. Anyone want to guess what band that is? Mark Down and Mel from Flint, Michigan, as I recall. Not too far from my neck of the woods. You can almost call them a Detroit band. This is a compilation album. It was released in 1972. That same year, they kind of reinvented themselves a little bit with a little more radio-friendly sound, and were produced by a guy named Todd Rundgren, and they came out with a little song called "We're an American Band," which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest classic rock songs ever. And of course, you probably guessed by now, we're talking about Mark Farner, Don Brewer, and Mel Shacker, aka Grand Funk Railroad. And I bought this very album in 8th grade, so I'm going to say 1975. So I've had it a long time. And this is an album I listen to a lot. This is one of my albums from growing up. Some of my albums I bought over the years, or I didn't listen to that much. I listened to this album a lot. What's kind of funny about these albums in this period, I was looking at it and I was remembering how I would listen to certain sides. I didn't listen to side 3 that much. So back then, you could, you'd have to pick a side. So I listened to 1, 2, and 4. We've got on this Time Machine, Into the Sun. There was eclipse a few years ago, and everybody was posting sun-related playlists. Like "Here Comes the Sun" would be obvious, or "Good Morning." I don't know, whatever. Some of the sun songs, and I felt kind of proud of myself because my little playlist included "Into the Sun," which I don't think a lot of people had forgotten about that song. It's a great song. Heartbreaker, Feeling All Right. Excellent. Whenever I hear "Feeling All Right," so many people have done that song. I think Traffic. But I love the Grand Funk version. Foot Stomping Music. Now, on some of these, they added Craig Frost on keyboard. And so there's Paranoid. Not to be confused with Black Sabbath Paranoid. I was in a high school band, and we actually played Heartbreaker. Then you've got Are You Ready? Mean Mistreater, TNUC. You know what? I didn't listen to side 3 that much, and I wasn't that familiar with TNUC. Literally, I listened to this album tons, and I don't think I ever listened to side 3 all that much. That's the weird thing about vinyl. But TNUC is a coarse term for a woman's sexual anatomy, which I don't particularly find a very attractive term. But anyway, there it is. And the awesome side 4. Look at Inside Looking Out. I think that's the live version, if I'm not mistaken. And that's the one, I'm sitting here lonely like a broken man. Little shades of Beavis and Butthead. I remember when he would say, "Work all day, waking up, getting up." And I think there was an Animals song that said "burlap bag" or something, and they changed it to "nickel bag." And I don't know if young people know what nickel bags and dime bags are. That's sort of the Cheech and Chong era. Then you have the awesome, one of the great songs, "Closer to Home," "I'm Your Captain." And I think that song was kind of done early, and the production values, I love it, but the production values, maybe if they'd done it in 74, 75, it could have even been more epic with sort of a bigger production. But I love that song. I'm Getting Closer to Your Home. And that's a great example of the greatness of Mark Farner. Let's read this right here. From the dawn of recorded history, stemming through the lifetimes of every man, woman, and child who ever walked upon the face of the earth, there have been but a handful whose fate it was to become known as phenomenon. From their birth came the deeds, and from their deeds recognition, and few indeed were born to be known in their time by their first name alone. There were, of course, literally thousands, from Einstein to Oswald, from Mozart to Manson, from Hitler to Hemingway, who burned their family names forever into the pages of history. I wonder if they would say that today. Hitler, I'm assuming Lee Harvey Oswald, Hitler to Hemingway. I'm wondering if that would be written in the same way today. Discounting those whose last names were either completely unknown or non-existent, Adam, Moses, Noah, Cleopatra, the true leaders of each cult, each phenomenon, have been known by their first name alone. From peace and war and innocence and politics, there came Jesus and Napoleon and Twiggy and Mao, one of the great killers of history. I'm always sad to see young people that sit there and accept Mao. He's right up there with Hitler. And it was yet this unknown energy, something phenomenal, which caused an entire world to wake up one day and realize that everyone knew a boy named Elvis, the lost sheep had again found a shepherd. So what they're saying is, you reach a stage where you don't need a last name anymore. So Mark, Don, and Mel, you don't need a last name. That's like Cher. That's like Elvis. It's like Madonna. You don't really need a last name. Napoleon. And I don't know if Mark, Don, and Mel rise to that level or not, but maybe they did in this period. When you hear Ella, the mind says Miss Fitzgerald, but when you hear Elvis, one thinks only of the king. His time came to pass in the 50s. When you hear John, Paul, George, and Ringo together, the last name slips silently by as the mind becomes fixed on the Beatles, whose era was known as the 60s. It has often been said that art becomes great not when it is good or bad, but only when it absolutely cannot be ignored. For Mark, Don, and Mel, that time came in the years 1969 to 1971. And that's Terry Knight. And I think he was, the early version of Grand Funk was Terry Knight and the Pack, if I'm not mistaken. And I used to hear about them some in Detroit. Let's look inside this great album. It's a compilation album. Like I said, in 1972, they kind of reinvented themselves with producer Todd Rundgren, no slouch, and did We're an American Band. Look, you get some newspaper clippings in here, and you also, it's hard to navigate all this. I'm just holding a cell phone. The sleeve also came with a bunch of newspaper clippings. I actually thought about reading them, but then I thought, there's so many, it would take 45 minutes. Grand Funk starts Euro performances. GIs in Germany take free ride on Grand Funk with Humble Pie. Look at Time for Gold. Hot Group gets the cold shoulder at home. Grand Funk, other rock groups on stage. Let's see the other side of this. GNR Goofs. I noticed a lot of these, I remember reading them when I was a kid. A lot of them are newspaper clippings, and they all say that a lot of them at least are really critical of Grand Funk, say they couldn't play their instruments. Record officials puzzled by Grand Funk's success. Despised by critics. Grand Funk does it again. Got some old pictures here. They're kind of hard to make out. Thousands of youngsters gathered Saturday at Shea Stadium to purchase tickets. Boy, concerts were different back then, weren't they? Grand Funk is lousy. Look at that. Grand Funk has continued to be such an unprecedented musical phenomenon that despite the utter worthlessness of its music, a few words need to be said to rebut the countless hype that comes from the manager's office. Obviously, the man who wrote that doesn't know doodly squat about rock and roll, because Grand Funk's awesome. One thing I will say is I actually remember, Grand Funk, at least a lot of these clippings made it sound like, they couldn't play their instruments. And that was kind of the stereotype of rock back then. It was just loud, and they kind of used volume and distortion to cover up the fact that they couldn't play. And they played fast to cover up the fact that they were sloppy. And there's maybe some truth in that. But actually, Grand Funk wrote great songs, and I really respect the parts they came up with. Particularly, I think, in that We're an American Band period, like Bad Time, Locomotion, Some Kind of Wonderful. Come on, those are some all-time classics, and they're very polished, radio-friendly songs. But I love this kind of jam period, this kind of Woodstock era Grand Funk too. I don't think they're at Woodstock, but there was a big festival here in the South that was kind of like the Woodstock of the South, and I think Grand Funk was one of the headliners. And I used to have the live album from that, and I might still have it. Let's see, look. Now, this is a vintage shot of an old concert, and they're passing this girl over the heads. They're passing kids at Madison Square Garden over their heads, if you can see that. And I remember when they used to do that at concerts, and they would pass people around. One thing I remember about that is some of these, and it was almost always a girl, maybe a thinner guy, but it was almost always a girl, and a lot of times she'd have hands all over her body, and that's probably not appropriate. Although, actually too, though, sometimes those crowds were just flat out dangerous, and if you had to get out, you couldn't. So that would be kind of a shortcut way to get out. I don't know. I mean, that actually may have happened sometimes, because I've been at concerts. You hear me talk about seeing the Who and Blackfoot. You couldn't move on that main floor. Peut-il y avoir un festival en France? Pour la première fois en France, Grand Funk Railroad. 81 jailed for rushing police outside show. Grand Funk hype. Look at that great picture of Mark Farner. Hope there's no residue here from the old days. You do some kind of a chemical scan on it, I might get in trouble. Look at there. What a great album. Great. And I like the more radio-friendly, Foot Stompin' Music is a great song. Now, they added a keyboard player named Craig Frost. I don't think he gets named a lot of times as one of the members of Grand Funk, but he was on a lot of their good stuff, and I'd noticed Mark Farner reference him. It was almost like he was a fourth member of the band. But that Foot Stompin' Music, that's organ, that's just a great song. Heartbreaker. Great band. Wanted to share this with you. Hope you have a great 2023. Thanks. God bless.